thanks so much for coming back to join us this afternoon. The focus of this next session is flexible working. This is a topic we've covered extensively at Stylist, particularly whilst navigating the post-lockdown world. Obviously, we've all experienced the changes in how we've lived and worked for the past 18 months. And more people than ever are expecting the option to work flexibly as standard. But for many industries, this is proving to be a challenge. Now, this is something most of you will be familiar with in the retail sector, because when it comes to attracting and retaining talent in retail, the industry is facing a double challenge of a Brexit-induced talent shortage and the knock-on effect of the pandemic. Retailers are reporting high numbers of talent churn over the past year, particularly in store, with a recent report suggesting that 30% of retail leaders have struggled to find the right candidates. Retail employees are increasingly looking for purpose, flexibility, and training alongside better pay. And while lockdown has had a positive impact on people with office-based jobs being able to work more flexibly, the question of how we can unlock this for those who don't have the luxury of being able to work from home and to create more equality across the industry still stands. So, this is the very small question we're going to be tackling today. How do we make flexible working a reality in retail? Luckily, I have some experts on hand to help us tackle this challenge. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Emma Stewart, who is the founder of TimeWise, a flexible working consultancy, Jane Beresford, who's Group Director of People Partnering at Pets at Home, and Andrew Jurd, Head of Retail HR at Next. So please join me in a warm welcome for our panel. So, Jane, Andrew, I'm going to start with you. We want to paint the picture, really, of what this challenge is and what you've been experiencing in your business. So, have you, Jane, had problems recruiting or retaining talent over the past year?
For sure, I have to say, I mean, despite us doing really well as a business at Pets at Home, we were extremely fortunate to be able to continue to trade through the pandemic. We've certainly not been immune to some of the challenge that I'm sure everybody has had to face. For starters, we've currently got over 1,000 vacancies right across the group. So that's in retail, distribution, and our vet group. So that in itself kind of demonstrates some of the challenge that we still face. Some of that, though, has been brought on by good news. So we've obviously been able to be fortunate to grow into some of the additional services that we may not have had prior to the pandemic. And we've been able to accelerate some of our areas, i.e. data, IT, et cetera, So some of those things that potentially we would have already had in flight, but they've just accelerated because of the pandemic. So, and I guess we've seen our retention numbers, our turnover numbers increase a little also because colleagues have got choice, a much more broader choice of where they want to go. So I think when I joined Pets at Home 2 years ago, our turnover figures were at 32%. We plummeted to 18% through the pandemic, and yet we're now just seeing them rise back up to around 25-26%. So I think overall we're facing, we were chatting earlier and saying actually what's been great this morning is just understanding we all face the same challenge no matter where we work, and we can all learn from each other on some of the things that we need to do. But I think one of the strengths that we've had over the last 12 to 18 months is realising that not one size fits all for everybody. And we've heard that phrase this morning quite a bit, and really listening to our colleagues and listening to our teams around what we need to do for them individually, but equally how we get it right by area. So we talk about the support office that you mentioned earlier. Of course, we've been able to do some things in support office, but when you're at the front line or in the distribution centres, as I'm sure you would all know, it's not quite as easy. So we've had to work really, really hard at that.
So challenges within flexibility of being flexible for individuals.
Correct, yes.
Well, yeah. Andrew, is that similar to your experience?
Yeah, it's certainly been the same from what Jane was sort of talking about. I joined a webinar last week. I think they said in the week from the 4th to the 10th of October, 2.6 million jobs were advertised online. And I think that just is it's a new record for the UK, but it's certainly a testament to the challenge that we have in terms of attracting people into our business, because there is so much choice out there, and with things like Glassdoor and people have a window into your world. So it's sort of making sure that you're there to shape that narrative, I guess, first of all. I think the pandemic we've mentioned, I don't want to dwell too much on that, but it's certainly, I think if you're going to furlough your team of retail staff, unfortunately, we weren't able to stay open during that. So whilst my team were working through the pandemic, obviously the retail stores closed. And that allows people time. It allows people time to reassess what they're doing and whether, and certainly we've noticed that with colleagues coming back from that, it's almost this kind of reinvigorated sort of choice of, well, I don't really want to do that and I don't need to do that. So I think those kind of demands are there. And just retail in general, even working for a successful retailer, the challenge of looking at a career in retail when you are faced with closure after closure after closure from retailers, it doesn't bode well in that sort of psyche of the next generation coming through, that is something that they want to go into. So definitely those are the kind of challenges that we've got around, I guess, recruitment and just appealing to...
So stability even within businesses that actually have performed well in this period.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about, obviously we're touching on lots of different issues there. We're going to try and focus it now just on flexibility. Now, obviously you're talking about businesses that have very different demands on your employees, but what are you being asked for? Andrew, what are your team asking for when they're asking for flexibility?
Well, we have a process in place. Flexibility is something we've always tried to inherently build into our teams. So we have a platform that they can trade their shifts. We call a shift marketplace and a contract marketplace. So we recognised very early on that it was something that we needed to give our teams control over that aspect, that they can give up time if they need to give up time to go and do certain things, or pick up additional shifts where they need to pick up additional shifts. So I think that's something for us which is kind of inbuilt in our team members. I think the challenge is when you start moving that into junior managers and more senior managers, is that flexibility dwindles, because you have this perception that as a manager, it's like, well, I need you here 100% of the time. And that's the challenge for us, I think, is drawing that a bit further up the chain, which we have kind of quite readily at the team member stage.
Okay, that's interesting. How about for you, Jane? Have you found that people in different parts of the business are requesting different types of flexibility? Are they asking about hours, days, about working from home? Because obviously the headlines usually around flexibility are you're at home or at the office.
Yes.
Obviously in non-office environments, what are you finding?
Yeah, and I think there are some common themes across all of the groups, but I think what we've seen probably come out of the pandemic, very similar to what Andrew has said, is first and foremost, people have enjoyed being at home more. They've been able to work with their finances to ensure that actually they maybe not need to earn as much in some cases. And therefore, we have seen quite a number of requests to reduce days and hours, and that's come up really across all of the areas really that kind of build up pets at home. But then I think if we think of the frontline areas, it is definitely a mixture of people in some instances want to do more hours, because our average contract length is 19, people are wanting to pick up more, versus people wanting set days. So this whole idea of the word flexibility, our colleagues want certainty, so they want to know what days they're working, what hours they're working, and they want to know that in a much more forward-looking place, rather than actually we'd need you to come in today at very short notice because we're short. And of course, we're always going to have a little bit of that. Typically in a Pets at Home store that you would see, we probably have around 12 colleagues. So you can see the other thing that we're having to work hard at is how do we inflate headcount so that actually we can help our colleagues have more flexibility as and when they need it. But I think it's really interesting because we are seeing it right across the board, even now in our distribution centres, which are 72% male population. We've seen since the pandemic 182 requests for flexible working. So again, you can just see it. It's a real pattern across all areas.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, Emma, does this echo what you have been seeing in the work that you've been doing in the retail sector?
Yes, it does. And I think the other thing to say first off is this was a problem that existed pre-pandemic. This isn't a new thing. You know, trying to balance flexibility with predictability and security has been a long-term problem in retail. I mean, I think what we saw, so we've worked with a number of retail clients, so Timewise works cross-sector, supporting businesses to get better at flexible working. But I think we've seen a bit of a dichotomy, because if you look at the research, it shows that one of the main reasons that people want to work in retail is flexibility. But actually then when you arrive in retail, we see two inherent challenges. One is that if you're on the shop floor and you're working flexibly and part-time flexible, it's very hard to take that form of flexible working up into management, because the nature of the contract will just suddenly change and the nature of the workload will change. So there's something about how do you enable people to progress, how do you keep hold of them with the opportunity to progress and take that flex with them. And the other issue is on the shop floor in itself, on the front line, in stores, how to enable that flexibility to be two ways, which is, to your point, the concept of flexibility is that I should have some, as a worker, some control and input into my shifts, my schedule, but obviously there's flex that is required from the business. And that is about looking at issues in relation to sort of team-based rostering and scheduling, and a lot more visibility and transparency and capturing preferences from individuals, because it is complex, but it is absolutely possible to do. And I just think the pandemic has effectively sort of amplified some of those issues, but it's also given us a bit of an opportunity to redress. And I think it's really important, because the challenge we have around this sort of two-tier response and actually inequality within flexible work getting worse is something I think we see particularly in retail, and being able to help people in store as much as our colleagues who have been able to work remotely is going to be really increasingly important.
Yeah, I mean, let's touch on why it's important though, because obviously you talked about the fact that this was happening pre-pandemic. But obviously we've also reflected on the fact that people had time. They had time to reevaluate what was important to them. There are a huge number of benefits to both employee and employer. Can you take us through some of those and how that actually helps talent retention in the long term?
So all the research shows, I mean, we all want some control over how, when and where we work. How much is the number of hours we work, when is whether we're working from home, working somewhere else, and the when is also really critical in terms of being able to know when, have that predictability. And the reason many people want that is to balance work with whatever else is going on in their lives. But increasingly, it is not just because of childcare or elder care, it's because people want to do other things outside of work. And I think that's what the pandemic has flagged, is we spend a huge amount of our time working. And we were talking earlier, spent on average 2 hours a day working more over this last 18 months because we've been in crisis mode. The challenge is how to unpick that and make sure that we don't just work at that sustained level. Because the impact for business, if we don't enable people to have that flexibility, is we are seeing the great resignation, we are seeing people walk, we are seeing people having much more choice. But crucially, from a business perspective, there is a huge amount of evidence to show the correlation between flexibility, job satisfaction, engagement, performance, and productivity. And, you know, that dotted line is clear, but it's just complicated and messy to achieve, and it often relies on giving our managers more capability and more space to be able to try different things. And I think in retail, we all know that's tough because we're in very tight margin environments. But if we don't do that, then I think we are at risk of seeing the talent drain and struggling to compete with other markets.
And I think, you know, I was reading a couple of studies on this. There's some really interesting statistics around this and sort of verification about actually for the individual, because of this control and the way that they're working, improved sleep, lower stress levels. You know, a 2019 study found that 39% currently working flexibly noticed an improvement in their mental health. So this is pre-pandemic. And actually those who didn't have it were aspiring towards that. Does that echo what you're finding in your work?
Yes, you know, for lots of different reasons, from a well-being and inclusion perspective. And you know, I know there was a session this morning, I think, on sort of well-being, and you've got a session after this on ED&I. And one of the things we would argue is, you know, we absolutely need to give people space for meditation, and we need to give people fruit, and we need to do all of those lovely things. But we also need to give people the ability to manage their workload within the hours that they're contracted to work. And that is something that involves really a deeper understanding around sort of job design and how we do design jobs to enable that balance. And we don't teach that in this country. So we see all of those things. And, you know, there's a reason the 4-day week is becoming an increasingly popular debate. But you've got two ends. You've got at one end people wanting to work less, and they can afford to, and at the other end you've got people wanting to work more because they're not being paid enough. And I think that's the tension we have broadly, and we have to try and think about it from both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point, actually, in thinking about how to manage both of those needs. Before we get into the things that you've tried and what's worked and what hasn't, I just want to touch on some of the reasoning behind it, because you mentioned this, Jane, the different demographics now requesting. And I think predominantly we think of flexible working and childcare responsibilities and women. And obviously women are disproportionately affected when flexibility isn't an option. But I was interested to know if you are seeing that across every kind of sector of your employee base. Jane?
Yeah, absolutely we are. I think the other thing that we probably saw through the pandemic, and one of the things that we had to react very quickly to, was how do we resource our shops, first and foremost, where we had people either in self-isolation or actually, in fact, had COVID themselves or were caring for family members. And I think what we did was very quickly come up with something new called Friends and Family, so that we could try and recruit very quickly people who may have been furloughed and who needed work. And I think that allowed people to have a bit of a reset a moment in time to think, actually, what do I want to do differently in my life? So the requests that we see coming through can be from working parents, so that they can actually go and do the things that we'd all know, pick children up from school, etc. But equally to be able to go and study. And actually other people took up hobbies through the pandemic to kind of keep them going. So again, what we've seen right across is actually requests just to spend more time on themselves, to do things that they want to do. And as I've said, the additional requests that we've had, so we're 50% up on requests, on flexible working requests since 2019. And so I think that just goes to show how people have kind of set a bit of a pause button and reset and think, actually, what do I want for me so that I can be happy? But then when I'm in work, back to Emma's point, that I can give great service, I'm highly motivated, highly engaged, which equally then means better customer service and better return. So we've really tried hard to support, and we use a phrase of, and I think probably a lot of you would use the same, look for a reason to support it, look for all the reasons why you would support a flexible working request, as opposed to the reasons why not.
Yeah, 100%. Andrew, how about for you? Have you found that it's affected all of your either employees, demographics, or sectors equally?
Yeah, I think obviously I connect very closely with my colleagues in warehousing, distribution, head office as well. My primary base of operations is working in head office as well. I think the kind of discussions that we were talking about with the balance of the work where you see head office, and head office has this flexible working approach, and then you're sort of trying to say to the team in the stores, well, look, you've got it, but you can't have this because, you know, your workspace is there, and that's that. And that comes down to what Jane was saying. I think we've got to be more open to kind of accepting that and understanding that. I think, as I said to you, the way that we've built, we don't see that kind of increase in flexibility because it's inherent in what we do for the team. I think where we need to focus for ourselves is that management level, and it is just I think it's a fear thing. One of the things I was talking to an ex-colleague of mine, Joe, this morning about was if we'd have spoken about working from home in Next pre-pandemic, it would have been right. So you're just having a lazy day at home then, basically, and it would have been absolutely frowned upon. Now, because of a global pandemic, we're in this kind of world where it's like, oh, actually, that's more productive in certain areas. Oh, that's
Yeah.
fine. What, you're working from
Overly
home?
productive.
Why don't you?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Why don't you have that? And I think the problem is we need to go through that sort of epiphany with our management structures and start to say, actually, it can work. We're certainly moving towards looking at ways that we can move towards more four-day week, and certainly in stores that operate on a larger time frame rather than high street, that is possible to achieve, where managers can get to a point where they're working a longer day for sure, but then are off for 3 days of the week, and that's work that we're sort of working through at the moment. So I think it is thinking about that, but it is also thinking about the times when they're now having sort of things like area meetings, and we say to them, well, just have that from home. Like, go home from work, have the meeting online, and then you're at home. So I think it's also just about thinking about other ways to be flexible with your teams as well, and that's certainly been the response that we've had from the managers that's been well received.
I mean, when you're talking about small local changes and empowering managers, you can sort of see how you can achieve that. But how do you do it on a huge institutional level? Emma, how do you work with companies? What would you be recommending to anyone who wants to go through this process? It's huge cultural change we're talking about here.
Definitely. So I think the first thing is to start and look at the data and talk to people and understand, to your point, what kind of flexibility do people want, because people at different life stages want different forms of flexibility, and people in different job functions need different kinds of flexibility. So the first is to understand the data, because obviously, internally we all are having to make business cases as to why fundamentally we need to invest in making change around flexible working. And I think, this does cost money, and it's important to recognise that, because we can't just assume that post-pandemic we'll all sort of get this right. I mean, I was talking to somebody earlier at lunchtime. We can set principles around new ways of working, and we can devolve sort of responsibility to managers, but managers don't know how to do this, so we have to invest, so we have to make a business case. And for that to happen, it's about understanding why people are leaving and why people aren't applying, and to understand where they are not getting the flexibility and what kind they need. Then it's about trying to fundamentally create space to try and test, and we would always advocate piloting. And a lot of the work that we've done over the years in retail, as in other frontline industries like the NHS, and we've worked in construction, has been to work with teams to pilot different ways of doing this, because you don't always know, and the danger in a big organisation is to roll out something very big until you've absolutely proven it works, because that's what people believe in. If they've seen it work with a team or with a colleague somewhere else, then they will adopt. So piloting, and particularly, what I would say in the context of culture and behaviours is we need to make a shift from what we have for many years done in the conversation around flexible working, make it about the individual, to taking responsibility as organisations, which means being proactive, communicating, we're giving you permission, we want you to try this, you won't be penalised, you won't be overlooked for promotion. Now, all of those things come with structure underneath, but putting those messages out and being more proactive and having the conversations. I mean, pre-pandemic, we did some research at the Chartered Management Institute. Only 1 in 5 managers had ever asked a colleague or someone they managed about their flexibility on an annual review. You ask about all kinds of other things. So ask about how is the way you're working helping you is really important. So there are some small things and there are some big things to do, but it's about looking at the data, building the business case, and then piloting and testing. And there are things that can be done in teams, particularly when it comes to thinking about store. And that's about capturing preferences and then testing, as I said, things like looking at whether you can do more team-based rostering. But the one thing I would say is there's some very quick wins right now. And one of those is to make sure that you are, as organisations, being really explicit about the flexibility that you do already offer. Because for those of you who've seen the BBC website today, we produce an annual index every year that tracks how many job vacancies reference flexibility in the job ad, as opposed to an assumption the conversation will happen in an interview. And it's still only 26%, which is unbelievably low considering the last 18 months. So, we've still got 3/4 of job vacancies that say nothing about flex. The thing that retail can offer is flex. So from a brand perspective, we would really urge another talent attraction piece to make more of it, because people do want that. And then it's about trying to find the right balance.
So interesting. It's so low, actually. I mean, that is fascinating. Before we go to the round tables, I just wanted to take some time to reflect on things that you've learned. So what has worked, what hasn't worked. Andrew, do you want to share with us anything?
What hasn't worked?
Yes.
Yeah, I think our struggle has been moving people into a more managerial role as a result of the flexibility that we give to the team. So one of the things that we were really struggling was with that first management level, where individuals had kind of, I suppose, into Jane's point about wanting to have structure around their contracts. Our average is about 16 hours is our average contract. But when you start to build that, when you take your first step into, let's say, a part-time management position, you were probably sometimes coming below that 16-hour threshold in certain cases. And that became a real barrier to people saying, well, I'm not going to step up because I'm going to lose all of these hours. So we started to build in that flexibility at that junior management level, and sort of basically said, look, if you're on a 20-hour contract now and our first management contract is 16, we'll keep you on 20 and pay you at the management rate, just so that you can make that transition and do things like that. So you have to kind of think about what is blocking and going to the point about just understanding the data and what you're seeing. That's something we constantly are evaluating in the way that we work with our teams and try to get the feedback from and see what's blocking those. But it is about conversation. It's about talking to your teams and understanding what it is that they need, and we do that regularly and annually with our sort of, we have a forum called Your Team Voice with our managers and with our staff, that we talk about all of those things on a biannual basis and sort of collect those things that are there, and flexibility is always one, which is why it's been so inherent in the way that we let the individuals decide. Because I think, going to your point, it's if someone feels that they're in control of it, then it is so much more valuable, and you will work a lot harder, which is why I think we've got to work a lot harder to get that for our managers as well, because there is a stage to which we're happy with flexibility, and then we're like, no, we're not happy here anymore. This has got to be full time, and you've got to prostrate yourself on the altar of next and make sure that you are doing those hours, and that's just the way that it's always been. But I just think we need to alter that focus, because we've done it everywhere else, so it's possible to do.
Yeah, very interesting. Jane, how about for you? What have been your learnings through this flexibility trials? You've touched on some of them already.
Yeah, for sure. I think perhaps what we have needed to change, as opposed to not do so well, was mindset and some of the traditional thinking that maybe is just inherited over years and years and years of actually flexible working doesn't work and the computer says no. So I think we've struggled with that a little in some areas, and I think we've spent quite a bit of time trying to share the reasons why it is so important to support flexible working, because actually people, again, just have choice and could go to many other industries, maybe earn more, and actually then our talent pool dries up. I think one of the great things we did, I'm joined today by Emily, who's our wellbeing partner, and we recruited Emily, and she's done a fantastic job of flying the flag of all things wellbeing, which clearly flexible working is just one of those things. We introduced something called the Reward Hub during the pandemic, and again, all of the communication sits on the Reward Hub. So I think somebody spoke earlier around having everything joined up and in one place. So I think that's definitely been something that's really been positive for us, because there's been so much information on there, whether that's financial well-being, flexible working, mental health and well-being, mental health first aid training, all the things that would really help a colleague feel better to be in work, is all in one place. So that's been definitely something that we've done well. And I think finally just really listening to our colleagues, as Andrew said. And then I think that's now taken us on a bit of a journey around what does this look like for our leadership teams, and how do we go again on our development of our leadership teams so that we are talking more freely about things that really matter to our colleagues. And we've just recently done our We Care survey, and 91% of our colleagues are still really motivated to be with us. 76% are still super engaged. But the devil's always in the detail, and you can just see there's still quite a bit of stuff around stress, anxiety, flexibility, all of those things. So it's how do we work with our colleagues to get underneath some of those real issues so that we can come up with solutions together, as opposed to us kind of saying, well, this is what we think, what do you think? And then we just work together to try and move forward.
100%. I mean, it's interesting, the parallels, of course, that's how we've always done it. That is hard to change that mindset. One last thing I just wanted to touch on briefly is, have either of you managed to resolve the equality of flexibility for support office, which I think is interesting terminology, I guess that's a start, in terms of office-based to the retail environment? Because obviously flexibility is different in each place.
I guess we've got to say no to that. I think we've done some great work in support office, for sure. 95% of our team said they wanted a hybrid working approach in terms of a few days at home, a few days in the office. But there's a real culture risk there because, of course, being around and collaborating in support office is what makes us unique along with being out and being visible in stores. So I think we've done a good job there, but we still need to get better because the term support office is just that, because they are there to support our stores, vet practices and distribution centres. So I think when you're talking about front line, it's hard to get that same kind of balance. But I guess we've done loads of stuff with stores, but we've never quite cracked that balance between the two. I think that's still work ongoing.
Andrew, what about for next?
Yeah, I think also just taking on the from what Jane was saying, I think even at head office, the support office level, you have differences. So I noticed that the IT team is pretty much not at head office anymore. They're all sat at home because that's where they're more productive, and that's fine. The product teams still very much collaborative because it's so important that they are in the office collaborating and building those ranges and products. So I think even within a head office environment, there is still that sort of those barriers, I guess. If you're in certain areas, it is accepted and okay, and we can be flexible. So I think across the piece is also making sure that we're looking at all of those areas, not just, it's head office. Head office is completely flexible. It isn't always for certain areas.
So challenges still to solve. And before I hand over to Marcia Hazard, who'll be chairing the next session on solving the D&I challenge, please join me in a big thank you to our brilliant panel, Emma, Andrew and Jane.